And I'm always interested when those strategies fail. That to me is when the real story has a chance, a deeper story has a chance to be unearthed.
Why do we love other people's stories?
That's a very interesting question. I think we're drawn to other people's stories because we get tired of our own. I think we're narrative beings, and that in so many ways who we take ourselves to be is really who we are cast in the story that we created at a very early age unconsciously. You know, perhaps the family we're born into, and a whole narrative gets created that gives us, I think, the reassurance that we know who we are. But unfortunately, for most of us, I think the stories that we inherit don't generally lead to happiness. And I think that the fascination we have in stories of any kind is we'd like to see alternative stories, certainly alternative endings generally, and we'd like to be able to reconsider the stories that we've told about ourselves.
Do you think that's why some of us just love the dark cinema, going into a movie theater, because we're almost able to get out of our own body? It's like an outer body experience because we're then going to live life through someone else.
That's a very interesting comment. Yeah, I think there's something about the darkness which, in a funny way, allows us not to be seen. So much of our lives we want to be seen. So much of our motivation is to be seen, is to feel that we've been seen. And yet we can be imprisoned by often what we project others see in us, you know, our darkest fears. So I think there's a great liberating quality to going into a darkened cinema where you're not going to be seen. And you can perhaps then maybe feel greater freedom to give vent to your full, the full expression of your feeling life.
What makes you such a good storyteller?
Well, thank you for saying that. I think I'm a good storyteller when I'm invested in the story I'm telling, when I'm truly curious about finding a meaning within it or a thread to follow that I am truly curious about. And that permits me, it makes me better able to make discoveries within myself. I also find that as a storyteller, I have to stay, part of me is of course the one telling the story, but another part of me always has to be the audience as well, because I want to be experiencing the story as I'm telling it, because that's the best barometer I have to how it's going to be experienced by the audience. So I'm constantly assessing, or I try to, what would make this interesting to me? And I think the stories that I tell that work are when I've succeeded at finding those things.
A little bit of a quote here. A story is more than simply what happens. It includes the meaning of what happens.
Yeah. I don't think it's acknowledged enough how much the director in any format, feature or series television, even working on an existing show, how much responsibility, really, the director has, and power to define what the story is. Because as you pointed out, as I mentioned in my book, a story is not simply what happens, it's the meaning of what happens. It's as the director, you can define what is at issue. You can help generate the subjective states that are required for moments in a story best to land in an audience. And what a story is about really is determined by so many other factors in addition to what happens. It's the intentions of the characters who are performing the actions. It's understanding what strategies are being employed by the characters. And I'm always interested when those strategies fail. That to me is when the real story has a chance, a deeper story has a chance to be unearthed, because that's when you get an opportunity to see imagine anyway, how real human beings react authentically. That's something I'm always after, authenticity. The one thing that I can't tolerate is when I feel something is fake or inauthentic, because that doesn't speak to us, as it doesn't invite us to come alive ourselves. I often think of stories as storytelling as in film and television as making the written word come alive. And I think in so many ways, I notice within myself, I often, feel I go through life in many situations dulled and kind of self-protective and presenting a persona to the world and not really being fully present. What I love about directing is in many ways, it's a little funny to be saying this, but in many ways I feel most alive, most present when I'm telling a story and working with actors and working with the cameraman or woman to really find the truth and the depth of a story, because I'm fully attuned, I have to be, to what's happening within me. Am I feeling stimulated? Am I feeling intrigued? Am I feeling uninterested? Which generally is when I realize more digging is needed. This is when I have to go in and help the actors find a richer inner life, or a richer subtext, or a richer dynamic between the characters.
Well, and that's a great point that you made earlier about like inauthenticity, and we all wear masks, and we wear them in different situations. And I think that's the beauty of cinema as well, is that we can kind of take off our mask for a moment and watch, whether it's someone else's mask or a mask they're trying to not wear, whatever it is, and rest our own for a little bit.
You're reminding me of a story that I recount in my book. I have a chapter on directing the show Homeland.
Oh, great.
And while I directed many of episodes of that series, and some more high profile than the one I wrote about, what really interested me in this particular one is that it was an episode that kind of departed from the high stakes international drama and focused on a custody trial for Carrie Mathis and Claire Danes' character battling with her sister, who for several seasons had kind of been adversarial with Carrie over how to parent Carrie's child. And so it comes to a head in this trial, and in it, Carrie arrives at the understanding that she voluntarily relinquishes custody to her sister, despite the fact that there's no one in the world she loves more than this child. So that's a huge transition that she would have to make. And the writers wrote it in a way that gave me very little to work with, because they wanted Carrie not to have any cross-examination or call any witnesses. It was simply a litany of people coming to the stand, attacking her as a parent. And my job as the director was to make this a compelling courtroom sequence. And there needs drama, there needs opposition, there needs not someone who's not just folding her tent at the beginning of the sequence and then getting piled on for the whole time. So I had to kind of figure out ways to have Carrie. I knew what the ending had to be. Carrie had to arrive at this understanding. But I had to figure out ways for the audience to be cued that she was still fighting for her custody of her child. But the key moment the writers had told me they thought was the turning point for her was when her sister calls her a hero. And despite the fact that they'd been, fighting tooth and nail for several seasons over the treatment of her daughter, and particularly in this courtroom trial, there's something rang inauthentic about that. I thought, why would Carrie, simply by being called a hero by her sister, agree to turn over her child? It felt to me that a more honest response from someone in her position, and again, that goes to consulting my own feelings. Would I make a momentous turn like that if someone who was about to take from me the person I cared most for in the world, if they simply called me a hero, why wouldn't I just think of that as simply a bone they were throwing to me to assuage their own guilt for what they were doing? Why would I give it credibility? So I was struggling with this question of how to make something feel credible. And what the writers had told me didn't feel sufficient enough. So I embarked on a kind of difficult exploration about what could make this authentic, and I couldn't get a rewrite. The rewrite might have addressed it if I asked for a different dynamic happening. But they were insistent, no, we don't want this to, we want it to be just as it is. So it became my job to make it feel authentic. And there's a quote, I wish I could.
Yeah, oh please,
could
we'll
find
see your
it.
book here.
Yeah, I do. I'm going to get Here's my book, Directing Great
Oh, wow.
Television,
Okay,
Inside
very
TV's New
beautiful.
Golden Age. So this issue of how to make the moment credible brought me to this realization, and I wrote about it in my book. In a story, you can want specific things to happen. You can say that they happen, and you can do your best to justify why they happen. But that's not the same as creating the feeling that they credibly have happened. Bad drama is filled with false moments in which characters go through transformations that have not been earned, with false insights and false feelings ramrodding the story along. In some ways, well, I can go on, but I mean, that's the key point to me is it's like, yeah, you can say, well, this happened. This is an example of the earlier question you asked about, what is a story? You can say a story, well, the story is this. But if the audience isn't taken with you, if they don't have the feeling that something has happened, not simply that you've told them that it's happened or you see that it happens, you have to have the feeling that it's justified, that it's honoring the truth of the story, and that it's a natural outgrowth and an interesting development, within the story. So what I realized, let me see, I think there's some more. Oh yeah. So I was struck with this difficulty of how to justify Claire Danes playing Carrie Matheson, her turn. And I wrote this, which I think is the passage I'm looking for. Moments of reckoning that have moved me, either in life or in great storytelling, have taught me that transformation has a chance to occur when people honestly confront something about themselves that they've been unaware of or strenuously denying. When they give up their own failed strategies or self-deceptions, it can feel like a death. Transformation starts with being willing to admit to painful truths, which can break through our fixed ideas about ourselves and our defenses, keeping them intact. The possibility for grace to appear, the possibility arises for grace to appear, giving us a fuller awareness of and forgiveness for who we really are. Dramatizing this, to me, is the height of great storytelling, and transformation is probably the most personally meaningful theme I am drawn to explore in any story. Well, I can continue,
Excellent.
or I could just kind of say that what occurred to me, well, I'll read it. For this Homeland episode, the writers demonstrated a similar understanding in how they described Carrie's journey. She finally sees how unfit she's been as a parent, and this painful reckoning leads her to do the right thing for her daughter. But it was not landing for me, nor would it, I imagined, for the audience. In thinking of, and so I was then relay what I continue to write about. So the centerpiece of the courtroom drama was going to be the sister, whose character's name was Maggie, when she gets up and gives her testimony, and this is what the writers had thought, okay, she's going to call her a hero, and it's going to magically change Carrie's attitude towards her sister. And for the reasons I expressed earlier, I didn't think that would land for the audience. I thought Carrie would say, yeah, right, you're piling on, you're taking from me the most important person in my life, and you're telling me I'm a hero and I'm supposed to fold. I don't think so. I'm not that simple. Or as Hamlet said with the flute player, he says, how do you think you can play me as easily as you play that flute? So I started to think, what would move me if I were in Carrie's shoes? And that's really what I do as a director. I have to kind of put myself in each of these characters' positions so that I can consult myself. I have to be my own barometer for what I think works. That's the only chance I have to communicate. I have to assume that if it affects me, there's a chance it's going to affect the audience. So it struck me that I was thinking of the story incorrectly. And this goes to the other fascinating thing about storytelling, is defining the story. It's not just a story about Carrie giving up custody of her child. It's also could be defined as the story of a rapprochement between two sisters, a coming together of two sisters. And how would that be? And that goes to the point I tried to make when I was writing about transformation, how you have to have a painful reckoning. So I thought, if I were in Claire Danes Carrie's position in the court, what would move me would be if I saw that my sister testifying was going through almost as difficult a reckoning as I was being asked to go through in giving up my daughter. And I started to realize maybe my focus has been wrong. Maybe the focus should be on the sister's testimony. And I started to look at it, and I realized that there was an opportunity here to give her an entirely new subtext that I thought would bring about the desired result. And in the testimony, she gets up and she continues to pile on. You know, she says, yes, she did this terrible thing, and she did that terrible thing. And then she asked the judge, may I just deliver a few remarks? And the judge says, yes. And this was all written. Not a word of the script was changed. And she looks at what she'd written, and then she puts it down. And she says, may I just speak to her directly? And the judge says, okay. And she begins to recount their history. And she says, you know, when I was young, and you were always, you know, you were the star of the family. You were very talented, and I envied you, frankly. And, you know, I admired you, but I also, you know, felt less than you. And, you know, you're a hero. You do many things I could never do. But, you know, there are other things besides being a hero. And she goes on to, you know, and how I'd understood that from the tone meeting with the writers was, well, she's just trying to de-escalate. She's trying to kind of, you know, say, look, this isn't personal. You know, we were sisters and we had a life, and I don't hate you. In fact, I think you're pretty great in many ways, but you're not a great parent. And I thought that was what was not working, coming in with that intention, with that subtext. So I started to think, well, what if Maggie has to go through as painful an inner reckoning as we're asking Carrie to do? What if, and this is what occurred to me, what if she's never before admitted? What if this wound she describes is current? What if she still feels inferior to her sister? What if it's the most painful thing in her life to acknowledge that she's always felt inferior, that she wasn't loved as much as Carrie, and that she's never before admitted it for fear of really coming to touch that deficiency? And what I thought was wonderful about that was it also kind of accounted for previous seasons' behavior, because she was always, I always felt in these scenes, a little sanctimonious with Carrie. Carrie was off doing these amazing things, you know, preventing the next, you know, World Trade Center event, and she's being, but you weren't there for your daughter, you know, and so there was something a little off, and so I went further, thinking, well, okay, so why would she be motivated to say this precisely now? Why would she, in this public setting, and that's also what makes it more poignant, is in this public setting, she was admitting something she'd never before admitted to anyone, including her husband, including Carrie. And so if she gave it that subtext, if it was filled with that much pain and angst and sense of inner deficiency, to say, this is who I am, I feel nothing around you, why would she do that then? And the answer, again, it's a series of, directing for me is so much a matter of inquiry, of asking questions, and then your inner resources can come and answer. And what was coming to me was, well, this may be her last chance to ever talk to her sister. She's taking away her daughter. This may be the only form her sister will ever give to her. And if at some future time, and she knows she's doing it for good reasons because this child is suffering, but if at some future time, some imagined future, it came out, Carrie learned that her sister really did harbor this resentment and even hatred of her sister as a child that was still carrying through, it would cast this proceeding in an abhorrent light. It would give Carrie the opportunity of interpreting what happened as a selfish act, as someone who was just trying to get back. And that's not why she was doing this. She was doing it, she was acting from her best self in trying to save this child. And so she needs to come clean. She needs to take this public setting to come clean. This is who I am. I'm acknowledging it. And I'm acknowledging it now so you understand that's not why I'm doing this. I'm hurting myself in saying this, but I'm still convinced that this child will suffer if you don't give up custody to me. And that opened up the whole scene so that I understood, well, Carrie's transformation, I can believe, the sister will win credibility with Carrie if Carrie gets to watch with us as the audience this painful inner reckoning that Maggie goes through. And then, just to conclude this, so what was the moment of transformation? It's not that she tells Carrie she always thought she was a hero. It's the credibility that she wins in making this personal confession that opens Carrie to hear the next thing she says, which is to tell her, you are a hero, you are motivated by, your destiny is to do what you do. So I know now you're saying you're going to be a better parent. I know now you're saying you will not ever, betray, your daughter in any way. But how can you know that? Isn't it more true? Isn't it more true to say that the next time a world crisis happens, you won't be able to resist? Isn't it true that the record shows that? Can't you acknowledge that you're going to wound her again, just in the same way you've heard all these witnesses testify the many ways she has been wounded? Even though your intentions now are good, isn't it inevitable you will? And because Carrie can now accept that as true, as coming from an authentic place, it permits her to drop her own defenses against her sister and see the truth of it and make the transformation.